Hi, everyone, and welcome to Quality Times. Today, I have a topic that I think is underappreciated and just not discussed enough, digital strategy in GxP. And I have a pleasure to have today Chris Demers from Skellig and obviously myself, Nikolai Makaranka. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself and tell a little bit what you guys do?
Sure. I'm Chris Demers. I'm head of digital and data at Skellig. We are a systems integrator that works exclusively in life sciences. So we have probably about 100 engineers primarily working on the Delta V control side. And then there's a core group of folks who are working in MES space, including PASEX and Tulip. And then there's a handful of us who are working more on the digital transformation strategy, data engineering side with a number of clients in pharma space.
You're a perfect guest for this topic. As I mentioned to you, in manufacturing, in this digital space, if you made wrong decisions, it's like marriage. You will have to stay with them for quite a bit and work through these issues. Mm-hmm. And I think why this topic is so interesting is exactly the reason for that, that if you don't put enough effort and thinking into this strategic decisions, you're just gonna suffer for a very long time. And whoever comes after you, and I've seen this many times, they will have to figure out, okay, how do we work around this? How do we integrate these systems? So having some kind of framework of digital strategy and vision, like I don't know, even if you sort of look at it visually, how do you even think about it? What strategy should be, especially in the GxP space where the changes are even more constrained, right? Once you put these investments in, it's very hard to get back out of them. So my first question, Chris, will be, how would you define digital strategy? Because often what I see for many organizations, this is sort of just a 5-year roadmap. That's what they look at as a strategy, but it's definitely missing lots of these critical decisions that should be made regardless of what solution you put in place, but how this solution sort of should work together.
It's a challenging topic. And I feel like if we stick with the marriage analogy, like a marriage, it needs to be worked on constantly. Like there's things change, new technology changes, business changes, and you got to revisit that strategy. It's like it's a living thing. I've seen it done poorly a lot most of the time. And I think that what it ends up being, or what I've seen it be, is more of an IT-driven exercise, so to speak, because they generally own the digital strategy. So I think it's easy for me to speak of maybe how not to do it, I guess, which is from a pure technology perspective, like a goal gets set from purely an IT perspective, which is we want to get to some digital plant maturity level 4 or whatever, something wholly unachievable. That there is a mismatch, an impedance mismatch, so to speak, between that and the business objectives. Like the business is going on their own little trajectory and IT's going in a different way. And there's very little cross-pollination between these two groups. So I think, too often digital strategy is purely from a technology perspective. It's like we want to increase the adoption of AI in our facilities. We want to use multivariate analysis or something on our manufacturing lines. Like it's a very technical thing. And then it's only once they've started their proof of concepts. I say they, meaning like sort of the IT organization, like they've started various proof of concepts, and then they kind of reach over and they're kind of fishing for use cases. Like, hey, we got this cool thing. Do we have an actual business use case now? So that is how I see it play out far too often.
So they set a goal and they basically want to achieve a goal. And that's, using a sports analogy, that would be like a strategy like, okay, guys, you need to win. That cannot be a strategy.
Right.
That's sort of your ambition.
Yeah.
You cannot tell people just, go score goals and score points, and that's how we're going to win it.
Understood that.
Yeah, exactly. I see what is often is missing, even around this goal setting, right? Like if you say we want to adopt AI, I mean, why, right? This typical 5 why exercise, you want to understand why. Eventually you should get to the point where you want to make more money, right? Simplifying it or help more patients.
Yeah.
And I think from there, you need to unfold back. And at some point, how I see it, you would want to have some kind of qualities of your full IT landscape that you've achieved. And that will be like interoperability between systems, right? That it's just cheaper to connect things together,
Yeah.
or you can faster implement things, or you can bring in new technologies. Let's say being able to bring in something new, whether it's AI or sensors or something else. This is a quality that should come out of the strategic decisions rather
Yeah.
than having AI itself,
That's right.
right? Because tomorrow there will be something new. Even with AI, it changed so much. A year ago, it was all about LLMs. Now it's agents, and it's very, very different in architecture. And I'm sure many people will have very hard time adopting something like an agent just because the amount of changes it requires. And
Mm-hmm.
if your strategy didn't give you this quality of this flexibility, there's no way for you. You just will struggle with that.
I think that last point is key. I think it needs to, like the digital strategy, because at the end of the day, IT is a service organization. Like they are there in service of the business, and so like if the business has a trajectory, a goal of being, I don't know, closing deviations 50% faster, or uh, releasing 1.5 times the amount of batches, like, and they have to shorten their batch release review timeline. Like those are tangible business objectives that can then be supported by whatever AI, if it
Mm-hmm.
like whatever cool digital technology, but there's like a direct relationship, and it just makes the whole process work a lot easier because you've got business leaders who are invested in this technology. Like they know that in order to achieve this goal of closing out deviations faster, like we need to support this investment in this large language model, whatever deviation investigation exercise. I don't know, just making stuff up. All sort of new technologies, digital technologies, kind of fit or need to fit into that. I don't know, that mindset, and that's just
Mm-hmm.
I've not seen it done that well, where you first map out, like I worked for two different CDMOs, right? And so like tech transfer timelines were always a target for a CDMO. Like how fast can we go from gene to like a drug product? And so you get different, like 6 months, 3 months, 9 months, or whatever. So like the business always has that objective, an overarching objective, but then there's frequently like a gap, like where these technologies aren't being put in place to help achieve that, because
Mm-hmm.
the business can't achieve that by itself. Like it needs innovation, new products, new technologies. Maybe it's soft sensors, maybe it's PAT,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. But it takes work, and it's like it takes a lot of like cross business unit where everybody just kind of has to sit in a room and you kind of have to understand each other, what your goals and what you're talking about.
So do you feel today whatever is called digital strategy, it would be more like isolated exercise
Oh,
where IT?
100%. You might have some representation from
Mm-hmm.
business leaders, but it's not enough. It doesn't capture like the full business trajectory of the organization. IT folks end up just kind of talking about the tech, and then the business people just
Mm-hmm.
kind of, you can see their eyes just kind of glaze over, and they don't really, there's just a fundamental mismatch there.
Yeah.
But
So it's more like business has their needs and IT has ideas, and they sort of work independently on both. And you meet for 1 hour and try
occasionally,
to
yeah.
connect it somehow.
So I think it helps to have that kind of perspective of like your purpose as part of your digital strategy is there to support the business. That's the only reason. Otherwise, you're just doing tech for tech's sake, basically,
Yeah.
and you're kind of lost in no man's
Yeah.
land.
And then what business does, they create a shadow IT, and that's
Yeah,
what
exactly.
I used to be. All my like 15 years in pharma, I never worked in IT, but I always worked on technical
Yeah,
things
you're
on
in
the
IT.
business side. Yeah, and that's where you compensate for this lack of cohesion between the two parts of organization where you try to plug this whatever gaps or create some kind of interface to communicate with IT, and it helps a little bit, but it's again it's just compensatory mechanism. It doesn't solve the problem. It
Mhm.
sort of tries to put some band-aid here there. And I know this kind of structure exists everywhere. People would create all kind of business analysts, analytics, data science, and you then look what these guys do. They almost like stand up full solutions,
Mm.
which for whatever reason they are not working on with IT for all
Mm.
these problems of big organizations that you mentioned.
And that's like, I can see, yeah, people circumnavigate IT when they don't move fast enough. Like that was one of the things I could see. One of my favorite things about working at CDMOs is the speed. Like everything is always moving so fast, and there's new modalities and new clients and all sorts of. It's just chaos all the time. And that's not the pace of IT. But what I didn't fully appreciate until I worked on the IT side was just the scale in which IT needs to look after things. Like I would kind of geek out over some new technology, but then you kind of have to think through like what is the IT is looking after, what is the support model, like what does the infrastructure have to look like when somebody has to submit some ticket because they can't have access, like who does that go to? Like there's a huge amount of overhead that then creates kind of this slow pace, but it's a necessary attribute of implementing new technology that a lot of people don't think of. They just want to move. Like I came from academia, from lab spaces. I love moving fast and breaking things, and that's just not what IT does for good reason.
Yeah, having built an out of the box solution now with the icon, I definitely can see all these other things you need to work on, like security, infrastructure support, and there's a lot of things to be taken care of.
Yeah.
So definitely, shadow IT is not the answer for
Mm.
sure. It's just something to get by to get quick results, but you never will get this scale. And this is what you see with this organization. So often it's very people dependent. They build some tool, they move on, the tool dies, that's
Mm.
it. It never sticks around and it's never sustainable. So the real change should come through IT, that's for sure.
I do feel like it though. It's kind of an interesting point because I wonder, like, is the shadow IT part of the solution though? Like, do you need a group of people who are allowed to move fast and break things and be the disruptors and test out new ideas? But then there's like, if that's the case, then you need to figure out a way to kind of productize and industrialize
Yeah.
that proof of concept.
Yeah, that's a good point. So basically, what you are saying that there shouldn't be like a very strict delineation between IT and business, and that's maybe part of the problem. And it's like a coastline, right, where you have all this like marshes and crevices and sort of small creeks. So the water is not just like hitting the bank. So you have some kind of gradient
Yeah.
between soil and the water. So you need this smooth gradient border between the organizations where in this area there is space for experimentation
Right.
on the border where you can like try experiment. Okay, it doesn't work, you move on.
Mm-hmm.
If it works, you bring it into scale. So I think this transition it doesn't work, but I agree. There's definitely value in having people in between that have this duality that understand business very well, but also have very deep connection with IT.
Mm-hmm.
And I think pharma in that sense is not maybe unique. It's probably common issue across any business where you want to have this more tight collaboration, but the question, okay, how do you still have some cohesion and ability to steer this whole technical organization while being able to connect with different partners across businesses?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, one of the challenges in pharma is that ability to be agile. And I don't know, like you can't just spin up a project kind of willy nilly because then that person's going to leave and then whatever that project will die. But equally, it can't be like a huge lift where
Yeah.
every project is this big formal process of, I don't know, that requires multiple rounds of review. People I've been through that before. That's absolutely
Yeah.
exhausting to get across the line.
I think part of it as well is budgeting process because it's primarily made for these capital investments,
Mm.
when it's like 5-year horizon, you're building a building and putting equipment in. Man, if you apply the same for this like 100K project, it just doesn't make sense. You end up, so first you have to wait for a year, once it gets approved, and then by the time you get the money, it's like either not relevant or you left the company
Right.
or something else. So I think that's where a lot of innovation dies in these big corporations. But how the system could have worked if you have this almost like internal venture fund
Mm.
where money could be called off on a regular basis. Let's say on a monthly basis, you allocate whatever with K. So this way you meet the demands of the financial folks that you give them some idea how much cash you will spend.
Mm-hmm.
Plus you allocate this cash in increments, and you on purpose don't make decisions with a long horizon. You just like literally, you have one specific amount to allocate on a specific cadence, and you let people compete for this amount with different projects. And if you couldn't get this money, you try next month, and let's see, if you just drop off, that means probably it wasn't such important project. I think something like that would be much better system, and it's totally doable. I don't see why organizations cannot really put it in place.
No, because I think you could track, to some degree, you could track return on investment as well. So you could have some clear, I mean, you'll have some losses, like some things will just whatever, but hopefully you don't have to burn through a whole lot of money to figure out that something's not going to work. I mean, yeah, fail fast, I guess, would be that's not something that I've never been in any organizations that have been part of that fail fast mindset.
Yeah, I think it just doesn't sound right. It's, in the tech world, like fail fast and break things. That was the analogy.
Yeah.
Pretty much another way to say learn. So you need to learn fast and you need to experiment. But definitely in the regulated environment, there's like too many bad connotations for that. So
Yeah.
that's where this thing, I know people usually sort of frown at this phrase, but in essence, what it means is just like, look, you need to learn and apply this learning faster because it's very hard in this world with so many different technologies make right decisions right away, and you want to try a little bit and then have opportunity to go try something else rather than commit millions into something big that maybe halfway through you realize, okay, it doesn't fit exactly with the rest of the landscape, but there's no way people would stop these projects. There's just like, you need to save your face. There's already a lot of sunk cost, all the psychological reasons and political reasons why these projects wouldn't stop.
I think if you don't have that test bed to going back to kind of the digital strategy, like if I think of something that I am involved with kind of on a daily basis, which is like moving data from A to B, from shop floor to whatever, cloud, broker, you name it. And there's a bajillion different ways you can do it. And I think what happens in these digital strategy discussions is because in the early stages in the room, nobody's done it. Like everybody is coming from different, maybe they've done it at a previous employer or something like that, or maybe they're just out on the internet searching for what's possible. And the sales stuff, like they're going to tell you, yeah, it's possible to do whatever. Like, yeah, you could use Azure to ship data from A to B, use whatever, IoT Edge, IoT, like different technologies. But then you could do it in HighByte or other tools, Litmus, you name it. But it's all theoretical discussions in these digital strategy things. So unless you can actually test it out, it just becomes this theoretical battle that is impossible to win.
Yeah, and that's where I think, going back to the beginning of our discussion, that's where the structure of the discussion is kind of off, right? You want to talk about the requirements, what you want to achieve in the end. It's not about any specific solution, but it's more about, okay, why you would go for some small vendor, whether you want to avoid a lock-in so that you don't get stuck with them and you cannot then connect other systems, or they use some kind of proprietary interface, again, that restricts you with integrating other things into it, or you want speed of change, where things should be modular. So stuff like that. I think if you set this foundation first around, okay, what we want out of this strategy rather than picking a specific vendor, which there are many, right? That interesting thing that in terms of solutions, I don't think there is not enough of them. There's plenty really great companies with very innovative solutions that thought about, okay, how we can make it easier to integrate, faster to change, and address all these issues that we discussed. But it just like it never really makes into production on time or makes into production at all.
No. Yeah.
What about, can I ask you this? So it sounds like it's a difficult topic in itself. If we add a GxP dimension to that,
Yeah.
is there any hope like to untangle this thing? Where would you say this aspect comes in, and how you've seen, good strategies around working through integrating into your digital strategy? How, and again, the goal here I think should be, how do you make validation, everything around GxP environments effective, right? You want it to be effective. That's the whole spirit of this regulation, but also manageable and reasonable. Because today I often see you get neither. It's extremely burdensome. Plus, it's like not super effective. I've seen, the system is validated, but still, it doesn't mean you're not gonna see errors in it. So that's where issues with that today.
Yeah, and I think it's a deterrent, obviously, to new technologies because of the validation lift. I think it is. I've been in a couple different organizations now who have been like really into CSA, computer software assurance strategy, as opposed to traditional CSV, and I can see that helping a bit, where you kind of go into the whatever technology you're implementing with a mindset of a risk-based approach, risk to patient, product, whatever, data integrity. And then you can kind of do light touch testing, unscripted testing, depending on how close you are to whatever affecting product or affecting the data. So I think that's a step in the right direction for sure, that I've seen.
What about technical decisions that can help you get to CSA? Because it's part mindset, part, I guess, also enablement. Let's say automated testing, right? This is where I see, again, low-hanging fruit that somehow everyone struggles to implement, which should have been implemented long time ago. And we would be able then to cut down on documentation that's vigorously produced with any validation and focus more on, okay, how do you actually ensure robustness is there and testing is there?
The funny part is I feel like this is a place where IT's been ahead for a long time. Like software development, like the whole concept of GitHub and the way that it works, like really kind of already gets to the core of what you're trying to do with validation. Like it's documentation. You can roll back code. Like it has so many features that, for 20 years we've been copy pasting versions of code into paper, whatever, or Word docs, right? And like that is not a way to roll back code to previous versions.
Yeah.
So I think that we can turn to these IT best practices and kind of adopt them. Like it's all right there. Like especially from coming at it from an automation engineering perspective, like the automation world is changing dramatically, and I think we could learn a lot from the software development space, honestly.
Yeah, I would say it's not even software development exclusively. As you said, these technologies, they've been around, and a lot of this is just good engineering, right? I just was at the PDA conference. There was someone was presenting about unified namespace, and this is just like pretty, neat trick. There's nothing really special about it. There's no AI, nothing. It just basically,
you started on UNS,
yeah, you want to avoid doing this cleanup many times, and you want to do it closer to the edge. That's the basic idea. You did it once at the very beginning, you put it in one place where everyone can get it from, and the rest is just like some techniques, okay, through this whatever message bus, whatever how it's called, like a broker. You just come up with this analogies to make it easier for people to understand how to use it. But this is what should be in the strategy, where you say, look, wherever we do, whatever piece of data is produced needs to come out out of the source right away with this and this requirements,
Yeah.
and that's it. And everyone needs to implement it, and whatever solution you want for it, just go do it. Whether you want to use some vendor or whether you want to just like do it in Python yourself, doesn't
Yep.
matter, as long as you follow this requirement and adhere to it. And somehow that's just, we cannot get there.
Yeah, I think that space has changed. If I could go down this side road briefly, because this is an area that I'm like super passionate about. It gets to the point around data modeling, right? Like data modeling is something that IT's been doing for a long time on huge data sets. Like thinking about how do you standardize different whatever data from all these different source systems. And OT really never really, like, you implement a delta V system, and depending on what SI you hire, like you're going to get different tags in your pi system, and it's just going to be whatever the SI wants to do. And I think yeah, thanks in part maybe to this conversation around unified namespace, people have started to think about how do we model OT data. Where I think the unified namespace falls short is like you can't just model it in this hierarchical ISA 95 kind of. It doesn't always fit into that. Like that works great for equipment that produces kind of a lot of time series data, but it doesn't work great when you try to think of like how do you make a PLC then talk to some MES system, which is just thinking about transaction, like different batches and things. But there's a lot of like really smart people who are starting to think about this. There's this new, like there's SESME, the Smart Manufacturing Institute. Yeah. We've had some conversations before with Jonathan Wise at SESME. They're working on this I3X standard, but it's really, and there's like three core concepts, one of which is this are these data models. They call them smart manufacturing profiles. And there's other big kind of international working groups who are thinking about this. There's the German, I can't think of the name of them. It was basically the group that wrote the original papers around Industry 4.
Yeah.
But it's a German consortia. They're really big on this asset administration shell. Anyways, same core concept. It's like if you're building out any of these digital technologies, if you've got different equipment that are down at the shop floor, they should be pulling down these common data models. One of the things that always frustrated me, because I was in this space of exchanging data between CDMOs and sponsor organizations, and it's like we would structure our data in our own way, and then the sponsor organization would have their own ideas of how, and they would never, it's the same thing. Like these are bioreactors. Like I don't care if you're a little bioreactor in the lab or a big 20,000 liter bioreactor, like it produces exactly the same data. There should be some standard out there that we can just instantiate and call it like everybody uses the same thing. I think that's just like a small step, but that would do a lot towards achieving like a digital supply chain where you're having to do lots of exchanges of these different data payloads. Yeah. But again, things that IT, I think, have been thinking about for a while.
Yeah. So far, it's primarily PDF and email.
That's right.
The two standards we were able to agree on, but
and SFTP for the trip.
Yeah, at best. Yeah, at best. So with AI now on everyone's mind, now people are trying to figure out, okay, with what I have, how do you plug it in? And obviously it becomes even more complex and even more painful to get this new solutions integrated, exactly for the reason because you didn't have any digital strategy and it's all like hodgepodge kind of construction of your IT systems. So what do you see happening in this space, and do you feel is there a wake-up call where people start putting some engineering thought into these digital strategies because this big shift coming, and supposedly, right, it's still, I think, jury is out on this. Supposedly it's going to be easier to rewrite code and build something new, and in theory you can actually do quite a bit of do-it-yourself rework in some strategic spaces to alleviate some of these wrong decisions that were made before.
I think something you said on our podcast has kind of stuck with me ever since, which is it's around like curating data. Like I think that, I mean, a lot of these pharma companies are sitting on treasure troves of data, but the problem is like it's not in any format that any large language model could ever even hoped to consume. And so the challenge is, though, it's a poorly understood. I don't know. I feel like executive leadership sees the like the salesy side of these large language models and kind of like the magic. Like I remember when they first got released and everybody was like blown away. But it's like I think that there's a failure to understand that, yeah, this isn't really going to work on when you apply it to our data, because our data is just like these large language models need structure and context, and like our data doesn't have that. So like you either have to go through the hard work of fixing it, which is like not pretty and is super time consuming, or maybe there's a middle layer, like a staging layer that you've got to do a transform.
Yeah.
Like you got to go through the hard work of contextualizing all this years of data that you've kind of neglected. And I don't think that anybody is wanting to tackle that hard of a challenge, even if it on the other side of it is some magical land where the LLMs answer all your questions.
Yeah, I feel it's similar to this situation when data lake was the term du jour, and the idea was that I forget about structuring this data, just bring it in one place, and you will have this magic data scientist who will make sense out of it.
Yeah.
And I think LLMs actually pretty robust in like sifting through the mess, but the context window is real limitation. You cannot just take, even in some cases, depending on how granular data, but like days of data, you need to really give it a good context, as you say, to get a good output and to make it work. So the problem is still there. You still need to organize it in some way. Obviously, there is more leeway around how like you format it and things like that. But I think fundamentally, you still want to have full command of this data flows. It's almost like a nervous system. And this is actually the one thing that I think this company must own fully, how you make these flows working within your company. Because this is nobody other than them would better understand the value of this data, the sort of domain background of this data, and the context in the sense of why it matters, how it was produced, and they need to own it. And right now, these LLMs, they get pretty commoditized. What is now becomes a piece of engineering that sort of unique still, but let's see how again these architectures will develop, is this harness around the model itself. So how you build this context that you were talking about, what you feed to the model, how do you account for some kind of imperfections of technology that still exist. So this part is complex and again requires a lot of engineering, a lot of infrastructure that you need to make sure is there. Because if you think about data pipeline, right, it's kind of data pipeline on steroids. You now need to bring this data and organize it in a way that gives reasonable, meaningful input for the model.
Yeah, and I think that something that maybe we've talked about before, I think people put too much faith in the domain expertise of these large language models. Something that I've struggled to grapple with, and maybe it's my misunderstanding of these large language models, but I think it's based in some sort of reality, is you've talked before about the jagged edge of AI. And I think that especially in pharmaceutical manufacturing, like we're a very closed off group. There's not a lot of people talking about how you manufacture these products on Reddit and different forums that these large language models then scrape to become or to mimic human or some level of intelligence. They probably have a really good grasp on the language. They're probably at some whatever college level of sentence construction, but their understanding of pharmaceutical manufacturing is like at a high school level or something like that, and that's scary to me. So like you can make a sentence that is really makes a lot of sense, but unless you have a huge amount of domain knowledge, like you don't know that it's just bullshit, basically. Like
it's so the knowledge is engineered. I think what was demonstrated that you can actually get very far if you have enough good data that's suitable for this approach that we use to engineer the knowledge. And coding is a good example, right? It's a perfect storm because all this data is available. It's very high quality data. There's tons of open source code that you can use. You can also verify whether you're correct or not. So you can write a very complex program and you know the spec and you can compare it against the spec. You cannot really do it with language. You cannot have, as you said, a set of examples where you just take pharmaceutical problems, feed them in, and you have answers to test these models on. And the way how this model's trained, right, there's a lot of this sort of learning that's engineered. It's not learning as you and I learn through when we sort of understand how we actually learn and we can reapply it to any domain. So in that sense, this knowledge, this models, as impressive as they are, they still in the end the statistical super engines that can reason. I put it in quotes because it's not probably true reasoning, but it's still very, very useful, right? You can, especially if you able to structure the problem, it will find a way to crack, to find some issues in it, or to like come up with a code that would produce the result that you need. So it's still very useful, but you're right that in many domains outside of the domain for which it's optimized, which is to large extent is programming, coding, this precise kind of sciences, it would struggle. And the problem is like you don't know when. Sometimes it works very nicely. Sometimes it's sort of you see, okay, this thing doesn't really understand what it's doing. And that's where the problem is. And going back to digital strategy, if you're unable to experiment and unable to do iteratively this project, that's where it's hard to do it in-house because your system is built for committing millions into these large projects and you just like keep going until you hit the walls. There's no this mechanism to sort of go back, try something different and scale from there.
Yeah, I think there's like applying that to GMP use cases, like there's an interesting challenge too. And how do you take something that's inherently non-deterministic and make it deterministic? Like make it validatable in some way? Because like if you're trying to make some decision about some product and you ask the same question 100 times, like you got to be damn sure that it gives you the exact same answer like 100 times.
Yeah, I mean, now you can do it. You can ask 100 times and then take the average. It's like just super expensive. This is how many of these models essentially became more accurate. They just increase inference time. This is what reasoning is, right? Essentially just model talking to itself and sort of building this step by step thinking. You can also just ask it the same thing several times and then sort of let it vote on, whatever, out of 10 times, 8 times it decided this, and you then take it as a result. So there are ways to do that, but you either get stuck into this cost question. Plus, again, a lot of experimentation needed. You need to build the valves around that. You need to make sure it actually works as expected. And if you have very wasteful infrastructure, it just ends up being super expensive. And that's where many organizations get stuck because they just, I know it's sort of unusual to say it about pharma, but they run out of money because it becomes so expensive. You cannot just keep going. The business case is dead. How much money you spent on this? All right. In wrapping up this thing, so if you gave like a few pointers to people who would go in a meeting tomorrow, discuss digital strategy, what they would be?
My number one favorite thing to do is to talk with people who live the operational issues on a day-to-day basis. There's a certain level that like it works. The operators are usually just challenged with the day-to-day, but somewhere just above them, like these people feel the pain points, and they have to also live with the solutions that whatever your digital strategy is attempting to implement. So like those are my favorite people to connect with and like really understand their issues. And then as you're implementing things, like we've done electronic batch record implementations before, and like just from a usefulness perspective, your job is to make their lives easier, not harder. So like if your solution that you're as part of your digital strategy is implementing, like adding an extra step or not helping them in any way, like you've failed basically. So like that's probably my number one recommendation, is to really live the operational challenges.
Yeah, basically know the problem that you're trying to solve. Yeah, it's another part of the issue where these decisions are made at very high up and they don't really see the actual issue they're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
All right, sounds good. Chris, thank you very much. I appreciate your thinking on this.
No problem. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.